Today, I'm very happy to introduce a very new project in CESTA led by faculty member Ali Yaycıoǧlu and Antonis
Hadjikyriacou.
Sorry. So Ali is a faculty member in the history department. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us today for prior teaching commitments, so he sends his apologies. But we will be hearing from the wonderful Antonis, who is an assistant professor of early modern Ottoman and Mediterranean history at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. And today he will be presenting the project entitled Mapping Ottoman Greece, Space, Power, and Empire. And so without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Antonis.
Thanks very much, Selina, and very, very happy to be here today and to visit Stanford and really get this project started. Me and Ali, as you've heard, have just begun work after a lot of planning on how to proceed. And this is a project that focuses around a very famous person in the Balkans, throughout the Balkans. Any country you go to, there they will most probably know him. Tebedelenli Ali Pasha. As you can see, you can find his face in all sorts of contexts. And he's someone who was immortalized by Lord Byron as the Muslim Bonaparte. This was a man at the turn of the 19th century who had a whole area, Ottoman Epirus, that is northwestern Greece and Albania today. He had managed to create a parallel structure, as it were, of power and authority that was within the Ottoman Empire, but at the same time, in many ways, functioned antagonistically to it. This is a person, as I said, known throughout the Balkans and the Middle East, and really a transnational actor who has excited and still is exciting the historical imagination of people from Albania to Cyprus, from Greece to Turkey, and throughout the Northern Balkans. Now, he was a very controversial figure, and opinions differ. For some, he was a quasi-enlightened leader, a modernizing figure. For others, he was a traitor, a rebel against the empire itself. Others consider him an opportunist. Conversely, in Albania, he is considered a national hero and a ruthless, and in Greece, conversely, he is considered as a ruthless oppressor according to the official narrative. But these ideas, these perceptions of Ali Pasha are so complex that even in places like Greece, where you do have an official narrative of depicting him as an oppressor, if you go to his hometown, Yanina, present-day Yanina, you will still find many sympathetic depictions of Ali Pasha as someone who brought the Enlightenment and ideas of modernity to Greece. So really a multifaceted person with different and conflicting and competing interpretations of his life. Therefore, really a historical figure, a historical agent that has great relevance to people's everyday lives even until today and their politics. Why did I and Ali Yaycıoǧlu, how did we come to sort of work on this topic? Well, Ali's book, Partners of Empire, focused on this period, the 18th and early 19th century throughout the Ottoman Empire, which was a period that saw a lot of regional dynasties emerging in the Ottoman world. and you see various regions, so to speak, various realms similar to what we are studying here. Ali Pasha is here. He may seem to be one of many, but he is actually probably the second most important regional magnate to have emerged during this period. So Ali Yaycıoǧlu's work provided the one sort of pillar for this project. My own work on Ottoman Cyprus, where I explored different understandings of space, non-state-centric spatial imaginations, and how space can be conceptualized alternatively to conventional understandings of center and province. So these two engagements have really created the impetus for the current project. And for us, time, space, and place are very, very important. So let's start with time. This, as I said, this is the late 18th, early 19th century Balkans. As I mentioned before, this is a time when dynastic regional formations were functioning within, but also parallel to the Ottoman state. And during this time, we have intense historical processes. Change is happening in very rapid ways. We have fiscal transformations, we have political reconfigurations, and a general redistribution of wealth and power throughout the empire. This is a very controversial period in Ottoman history and historiography. It has hitherto been understood within the paradigm of centralization and decentralization, therefore having a lot of overtones of modernization theory. And most of those approaches really adopted a top-down perspective, looking for a strong state, or looking for a state that was able or unable to impose its will to the provinces. The problem with many of these approaches was that they privileged the imperial center as the main unit of analysis. And this is an endemic problem in Ottoman studies, and I'm sure a lot of other fields as well, where you may be coming from. Fields where the vast majority of the archival sources that historians use come from the state itself. And what we are trying to do is to use these sources in an alternative fashion to reverse that state-centric perspective. So let's look at space. And we've seen roughly where they were, the realms of Ali Pasha in Western Greece, basically over here. And in present-day terms, this is Albania, Western Greece, Macedonia, and the Peloponnese, and also some related parts of Bulgaria and even Serbia. These realms, however, cannot be easily classified. We're not talking about a state in the modern, a territorial state in the modern sense here, with fixed, strictly understood boundaries. This is a sphere of influence, so to speak. And this is why the map that I have here is rather misleading. It gives you a rough idea of where the realms of Ali Pasha are located, but his relationships, his connections, his links, and his networks stretch well beyond that. So we should think of it as a kind of a fuzzy area of influence. Most of these areas, of course, were ruled directly by Ali Pasha as an appointee of the Ottoman state, with a kind of the usual administrative mode of appointment and considering him fiscal authority, which was fiscal and military authority, which were the two fundamental pillars in the Ottoman Empire, as far as power and authority were concerned. Others were tax farms of different sorts. And as I said, this is a period of fiscal experimentation in the Ottoman Empire. New ways of farming tax units were being tested, either in the form of life tax farmers, in the form of short-term tax farms with a lump sum. And all these different modes of governance created new forms of relationships between people like Ali Pasha and the communities concerned. And we'll look at this in more detail soon. So here, one example are villages that would willingly concede their independence, so to speak, to a magnate like Ali Pasha in exchange for his undertaking of their tax obligations. So he would get the surplus of the economic and agricultural or manufacturing production of those villages in return for paying in advance the fiscal obligations of those villages. And this is a time when there are a lot of monetary and inflationary pressures in the Ottoman Empire. So to pay in advance cash for those taxes was the ability to do that was a valuable asset. And communities, it was a very difficult situation to find itself in for a community, that is, because they would concede a lot of their independence. But at the same time, given the economic pressures that they were experiencing, this was a relatively common phenomenon. And then there are other areas where we can see less formal forms of control that Ali Pasha exerted. And here we have a wide spectrum of modes of governance that were both formal and informal. The range between the direct and the indirect. So he would either have his own functionaries administering those villages, he would have his sons as well. The Peloponnese, for example, here was a large, an independent province, rather important province for the Ottoman Empire that was granted to his son by the Sultan. It was never officially part of Ali Pasha's area of direct administrative control, but being his son, through his son, he was able to have this indirect relationship with the province. The problem is that the precise shape and form of the exercise of power and authority by Ali Pasha in Ali Pasha's sphere of influence is rather evasive. And it's very difficult to visualize what this means. Historians also have had trouble to define the nature of power and authority, as well as to understand it spatially, because we're not talking about a fixed province. And even if we are talking about an empire where it doesn't draw lines on the map at this stage. I don't want to use the word pre-modern because that has a lot of other connotations. But the idea of territoriality as we understand it today was not something that was important or relevant for the purposes of imperial governance at the time. So what we are interested in really in this project is the relationship between space and power. Going to the last part of the triad, time, space, and place. If we're talking about, while we're thinking of space in a fuzzy fashion, we need to ask ourselves, what do places mean? What are these places where relations of power are being played out. They are developed and exercised. And again, the problem is that historians know very little about the microhistory and the mechanics of Ali Pasha's regional formation, the nuts and bolts of what it takes to run such a shadow empire, so to speak, or a mini empire. There's a lot of terms one could employ to understand how this functions. Now, we have sporadic information from various regions, but nothing that gives us a comprehensive, large picture of what it means to have such a formation. So to think about place and particular points on the map, as it were, the first thing we need to clarify is the center of his web of relations, the capital of his area of control, which is the present-day city of Yanina in western Greece, Ottoman Yania. And then we have to think about the key places that are part, that compose this bigger picture. The towns, the villages, the outposts, which provide security for trade. And this is something we will look at in more detail in a second. The merchants' inns, where caravans stop on the way to commercial towns, the ports, the markets, the commercial farms, and the pasture lands that are part of this. And of course, the bridges, of which, again, we will hear more. Now, why is Epirus so important? We have, through Macedonia, we have the Via Egnatia, the large highway that connected Istanbul with Italy as a commercial axis. So the western coast of Greece, through which goods and commodities would go to Italy. To provide security there was of utmost importance. During the 18th century, we also have the development of another commercial axis, this time north-south, connecting the Balkans with central and northern European commercial hubs and market towns. So an increasing importance of this region commercially. And this is a very mountainous region of the rough terrain, lots of rivers. Hence, we have an abundance of bridges. This kind of infrastructure to maintain and to build and to create is hugely important for the sustenance of such a lively commercial network. Security is also extremely important, and this is actually what made Ali Pasha the person he was. We can think of him, by today's terms, as a private security firm who had his own apparatus, his own militia that were situated at key outposts in commercial junctions that would make sure that bandits would not hinder trade. And Ali and I, in preparing for this project, we took a field trip last summer to Epirus to really acquaint ourselves with the landscape and to get a sense of the place there. And of course, Epirus, we can think of it as the land of stone and stonemasons. It is omnipresent in the landscape. You see here, this is a rooftop. And these tiles are found in all the traditional houses of the area, whether in Greece or in Albania. Judging only from the tiles, one wouldn't know which country they are in. And stonemasons from Epirus actually continued their trade when they came to the United States as immigrants. So this is an important function. And by bringing this example, we want to highlight how this project also has adopts a sensorial approach, something that would allow us to connect and better understand the environment, rather than simply recording it or documenting it or even analyzing it. And what are our objectives? Well, first of all, to reconstruct communication and transportation networks. We want to inquire into the kinds of relations and mediations communities had with Ali Pasha or his functionaries. We want to map the built environment that characterized his realms. Most importantly, we want to visualize the economic regime that was at the backdrop of his rule. And that includes the economy of violence, as well as the violence of the economy. So this is not just about simple figures. This is not just about big data and faceless numbers that can be interpreted as black or white. We want to make a much deeper analysis of all that information. And we want to categorize and cartographically represent the kinds of relationships between different historical actors. In doing so, we are employing the tools of spatial history, and this project aims at disentangling this web of relations between Ali Pasha and the lands and communities directly and indirectly under his control. In that, we are breaking new ground by bringing into conversation primary material from different languages: Ottoman Turkish, Greek, Albanian, Bulgarian, French, German, Italian, Russian, or English. This is an unprecedented project. Usually, at best, the most synthetic analysis of primary sources included Ottoman Turkish, Greek, English, and Italian, and French. So we want to really broaden the scope of the material that we're bringing together. And data from these diverse sources will be processed with the use of GIS tools in order to document, process, and analyze and visualize what forms of formal and informal governance entailed in spatial terms. Now, our initial inspiration for the project was this work, a 4-volume collection of documents published by the Institute of Historical Research in Greece, part of the National Hellenic Research Foundation. And this is a very interesting source because, first of all, even though it's called the archive of Ali Pasha, it's very difficult to know whether this was an intentional archive. The documents inside it are not very consistent. They're not coherent. They could be part, most probably they were part of Ali Pasha's archive that his bureaucracy kept. Nevertheless, there's no categorization here. And the typologies of documents that we have don't seem to follow a particular logic. But this very important work includes almost 1,500 documents, mainly correspondence. And the language that these documents are compiled in is very interesting as well, because it's written in Greek, but it's a linguistic medley of Greek, Ottoman Turkish, Albanian, Italian, Vlach, and all sorts of other regional dialects and languages. So to be able to process that information at the very basic level of understanding what a document says has already been done in the context of this work, and we are very indebted to our friends at the Institute for Historical Research, with which we are very fortunate to have a collaboration in the context of the current project. And they have provided all the data to us. And there's 2 more volumes coming up, again, showing the inconsistency of this collection. They are documents, these are collections of documents which were found in other archives, kept in other private collections, which seem to have a similar character to the documents that we have here. So, in all probability, this is a section of the Ali Pasha archive, but we have no idea what kind of a sample it is. And the Institute for Historical Research did a kind of basic attempt at visualizing and processing these data. And out of the 1,500 documents that we have, they isolated about 500 entries which concern correspondence between a single person and Ali Pasha. So letters, petitions addressed to Ali Pasha by a single individual. And this is one of the results of this attempt, trying to link up the different places where the signatory comes from and where Ali Pasha is. And of course, the center of this web is the village of Yanina, sort of the town of Yanina. Now the first stage of our process is to enrich this data set. We're treating this as a starter, as it were. So what we're doing right now is that we are including all the other documents that have multiple signatories. And in those instances, you have collective letters and collective petitions by villages or by particular notables from villages claiming to represent their homelands. But we also want to experiment with visualization. We want to go beyond this simple linear connection between the place of origin and the location of the addressee. We want to codify these relationships and understand the kind of networks that exist there through the information provided in those sources. We want to look at the density of connections that we have. So what we imagine by the end of it is changing pictures when we're zooming in and zooming out in trying to see what these connections are about. So we don't just want to draw lines on a map. We don't just make a nice map. We want to open new possibilities for analysis and see things that were not visible before. At a second level, we will go beyond the Ali Pasha collection in Greek, and we will include and enrich this data set with documents from the Ottoman Imperial Archives, and there the documents are, the number of documents is massive, and the information very, very rich. Kinds of documents we have there they can be administrative letters, petitions, contracts, imperial letters, or imperial orders, or private letters, cadastral documents, as well as fiscal documents. And then at a later time, we want to also include archives in Britain, France, Austria, and Italy. Now, obviously, this is hugely ambitious, and we want to take it step by step. As I said, the first step is trying to draw the connections. Another more tangible way of what we can do to understand and visualize aspects of the organization we have here is to look at fiscal registers. Cadastral documents that the Ottoman state compiled in order to have accurate, or as accurate as possible, information of the economic capacity of its provinces. And what I'll show you here is the work I've done on a different project on Ottoman Cyprus in trying to process these kind of sources, and we will use that as a model for doing the same for Epirus. So we have all the data here in a spreadsheet with the Ottoman toponym, and of course the challenge there is to identify it with the present day toponym, and believe me, in a place like the Balkans, it's no simple affair. The place names have changed so many times in the past. They've been cleansed and nationalized and erased from the map even. That to be able to find where they are is a major issue. I mean, I've had to deal with this in Cyprus, where it was relatively straightforward compared to what you will have. And of course, there's a national conflict in Cyprus, inter-ethnic conflict. And that's even simpler than Ottoman Epirus. Nevertheless, this is what we have to do. So once we have the present day toponym, we can have the coordinates, assuming that this is where it was. So we will have to double check everything. And then, okay, for the purposes of that study, we can see here all the points, the villages on the map of Cyprus. And what I've tried to do in order to show economic data, to show the trends of economic production, rather than an accurate depiction, because we don't have all the points of the map, we don't have all the villages mentioned in this register. I've opted for looking at the overall trends and understand which regions produce what and in what quantity. And in doing so, I've used inverse distance weighted interpolation, which has its own problems, and we can discuss them later on during the Q&A if you like. Nevertheless, it really has opened up completely new ways of understanding the organization of the economy in Cyprus and identify areas that before I wouldn't have imagined, but they had an importance. So doing something this for Epirus as well is, using this model for Epirus is our target here. And what another way of visualizing this data, apart from absolute figures per village, is to actually divide it by household in every village. And what is amazing here is that the pattern that emerges actually corresponds to the internal administrative boundaries of the province. And this was a shock to me. And the only explanation that I have to offer is a strong correlation between subsistence crop, like wheat, and population. That has something to do with the administrative organization. I'm still at loss as to why this is happening. But when I do the same analysis with other kind of products, with other commodities, it's completely random. And we can see different kinds of products as they are taxed. Again, the other limitation that this source has is that it only shows taxable goods. So anything that's not taxed is not going to be on the radar. So we have to be very aware of the limitations of our sources. And just like any map is misleading, so is this one. So through these ways of visualizing different kinds of crops, we can see the patterns, and we can see new elements and integrate them into our analysis. This is an interesting one, for example. We see olive oil production in Cyprus. Sorry, we see olive production in Cyprus, and here we have olive oil, which indicates that there is a very limited olive oil culture on the island, as opposed to somewhere like Crete or to the west in Ottoman Palestine, where you have an abundance of olive oil production and soap industries. So this kind of analysis opens up these comparisons and questions that need to be answered. Again, we look at wine, something that is considered in Cypriot historiography as a standard product is naturally being spatially concentrated, and what you see there is a mountainous area, as one would expect. But production is one thing, consumption is another. So we see what we can do with this kind of analysis. Then we have animal husbandry. Linen was a complete revelation to me. It never appeared in any other kind of source, and suddenly it's everywhere. Hemp that you would use for ropes on an island that needs to connect to the outside world with ships doesn't have hemp production. Another interesting question that needs to be answered and emerges out of this analysis. So I've showed you some possibilities of what we can do with the economic data and with the correspondence of Ali Pasha. Now, what are the further stages for the project? Well, we want to place communities, demographic information, and see the religious and ethnic distribution in those lands. We want to try and place some kind of borders, no matter how fuzzy they may be, and try to identify administrative and agricultural units. We want to look at infrastructure, roads, bridges, and monuments, the built environment. We want to locate merchant networks, the fairs, pastoral communities, but also intellectual networks, scholars, monks, Sufis, travelers, which facilitate the circulation of ideas. And all these we want to analyze and again map out and cartographically represent. And finally, we don't want to simply produce a book or many books or a bunch of articles or just a website. We want alternative forms of deliverables that allow us to engage with the public in more creative ways. So we're thinking of exhibitions, documentaries, educational material, etc. that will bring in school children, for example. Now this is, of course, an extremely ambitious project. You don't need me to tell you that, and you figure it out for yourself. And obviously, we need to take baby steps, one step at a time. We have multiple challenges here, linguistic, historical, methodological. We need to really develop GIS skills that allow us to deal with these challenges. Not least, as I said, toponymy, which is the very foundation of any kind of mapping exercise. Project management itself will certainly be a challenge, and dealing with Selena, we've given her a lot of difficulties over the past months, but she's been amazing in helping us manage this project. And we're very lucky to have the support of CESTA, as well as the collaboration of the Institute for Historical Research in Greece. But we want to expand our network of collaboration. And of course, in order to finance this big data project, we are planning to apply for grants both in the US and Europe, and hopefully we'll be able to realize this massive project that touches upon the historical experience of many countries and many communities throughout the Balkans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antonis. Really, really exciting project. So we have some time for questions. We'll be here at least until 1:15. So things that jump to mind?
I have a question on the network you showed. Of Ali Pasha's correspondence. And I guess on this slide you mentioned that you have intention not only to draw the lines, but actually categorize these lines and actually understand the meaning of these lines. I mean, they're not connections or relations. This is just abstract, kind of empty abstract. And that's a kind of general issue with network analysis, that most people like to draw on networks, but never really think about what they mean. My question is, how do you plan to do that? That's a kind of tricky thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, well, the first challenge is obviously to codify the relationships. So to come up with categories of relationships that are important to us or are important to our analysis. And then this is where the challenges of visualization come in. I mean, will we do it with, I don't know, different colors or different kinds of lines? Or this is, for us at least, uncharted territory. I'd be grateful if anyone has any ideas or suggestions, but these are precisely the kinds of issues that we're thinking about and trying to resolve. So other than different kinds of color coding or different kinds of representing a connection, dotted line or whatever, I don't know, we'll have to find a way to illustrate the richness of that link that will not simply be, a black line like any other line, like here, which is interesting in itself, but we want to go beyond that. It shows you something, but we want to go beyond that.
I was going to ask you, Antonis, about all of the data. You mentioned the importance of being skeptical about the data, but all of those different numbers for wheat production, olive oil, was it 1572? So how do you verify that data?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, your starting point is that it's problematic data. You assume that it's a reflection of the economy. And as a reflection, it's necessarily distorted. Now, whether we're talking about a pre-modern state or the present day state, I mean, take any country you want in the world and go through their fiscal data, you're not going to see a reflection of the economy. If you've got black market, you've got tax evasion, you've got this, you've got that. So at best, what you can hope for is a trend to sort of see a trend in the economy. Now, how can you check that? How can you verify that? Because you're absolutely right. There's instances when it is very clear that the tax surveyors are simply reproducing a ratio between key products, wheat and barley, for example. So what we can do is do a regression analysis, statistically, and see the correlation between the two products. And in the case of Cyprus, actually, I did that, and I had, if I'm not mistaken, 0.58, which was a pretty good correlation, as opposed to other areas where historians have done this analysis, and they had, 0.98 or 99. So at least we know that there is a certain degree of reliability. And even there, let me add, actually, even when you have a high degree of correlation, that's not useless data. Because what that tells you is that you have a lump sum assessment of the production, which may not correspond to the actual production, but it corresponds, it's a fictional number which gives you a very, very rough idea. And the Ottoman state is happy to do that rather than have a more detailed understanding. So it's a more distorted reflection, even more distorted reflection, but it's still a reflection. So even at the worst of conditions, there is something you can do with that data. But again, you need to be very explicit about what these limitations are and be aware of all these problems. Otherwise, it would just go to waste, and it's a pity. I mean, it's a very rich kind of source.
I was kind of going to ask a similar question. You showed the map of the villages and said, take this with a grain of salt, but it's difficult to, I think, continue doing that, to continue being skeptical, And so I was wondering if you have good population statistics and whether you use population to compare, if there's a high population but low consumption of a staple good, that would suggest you got, a hole in your data perhaps, and what that means for you moving forward.
Yeah. Again, population data is also it's even more problematic.
Right.
Because the Ottomans are counting heads of households, responsible taxpayers. We can't even assume that it's a family. A household may be 3 families living together. Now, that said, there's 2 things that one can do to use that data and verify. One is to break it by district and do the corresponding analysis there and see whether the patterns match up. And the second thing, and this is my little pipe dream I'm doing at some point, which is based on the hypothesis, on the fact that Cyprus is a huge grain producer, cereals. And we know that it traditionally has a surplus. So what I'm hoping to do is, by looking at the average and the mean of the per household grain production, anything above that, I would assume it's surplus. And then hopefully through some kind of calculation of calorie intake and how many people that would support, we can do the reverse analysis.
Right.
This is not a simple affair, precisely because not everything is recorded on that register. So there's sources of calorie that we wouldn't know they exist. But as skeptical as I may be of big data projects and whatnot, hopefully the margin of error will be lost in the bigger scheme of things.
Right.
And I think the only way to avoid the pitfalls of big data projects is to really have this hands-on engagement with the particular and the specific.
I have a question about the quality of your data over time. So do you have Do you have material for the whole time period that you look at? And how do you manage that? What kind of maps do you take different points in time and then make maps of that, or do you choose one year?
We will necessarily have to deal with the material that we have. The correspondence seems to have a pretty good distribution in the period of Ali Pasha's reign, let's say, control, power. We're hoping that we're pretty positive that the Ottoman material will really enrich that distribution and make it much, much more representative. But then again, the kind of sources, you have internal differentiations within those sources themselves. So when we're looking, for example, at the fiscal registers, which are quite erratic, it's very difficult to do exactly what you're talking about, to sort of have a time series, as it were, or show the evolution over time of how this distribution changed. So depending on the source, the typology of the source, as it were, you have varying degrees of quality of the data. So when we're talking about correspondence, we're much more confident that about them. But with the economic data, we'll have to settle as simply moments in time. We cannot assume that they have a long-term validity.
So, except for Excel, do you use like R or Python to deal with your big data?
It hasn't been so big so far, so we kind of settled with Excel and simple kind of spreadsheets. But that's definitely something we're going to need to consider in the future, also to be able to do more sophisticated analysis. At this stage, the analysis is so simple that.
Time for more questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you.